Do you have a piece of cartels? Just a couple of cartels. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Bonachari Tira Bonachari Yamuna Tira Bonachari Manachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivakacharya Astadada Sata Simad Abhay Charanar Vinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai Jayam Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivakacharya Astadada Sata Sishi Mud Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopi Nata Syamakunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtani Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Readings from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 14, Text number 6. Yayotana pada putro, Yayotana pada pudro, Munina gitayarbaka, Munina gitayarbaka, Mrityo kritvaiva murdhyangrim, Murdyo kritvaiva murdhyangrim, Aru roha harer padam, Aru rora harer padam, Yayotana pada putro, Yayotana pada putro, Munina gitayarbaka, Munina gitayarbaka, Mrityo kritvaiva murdhyangrim, Murdyo kritvaiva murdhyangrim, Aruroha harer padam, Ruroha harer padam. Yayotana pada prutro, Munina gitayarbakaha, Mrityo kritvaiva murdhyagrim, Aruroha harer padam. Yayotana pada putro, Munina gitayarbakaha, Mrityo kritvaiva murdhyagrim, Aruroha harer padam. Somebody else? Yayotana pada putro, Munina gitayarbaka, Murdhyagrim, Aruroha harer padam. Anybody else? Word for word. Please repeat. Ya, by which Uttanapada of King Uttanapad, Putra, son, Munina, by the sage, Gitaya, being sung, Arbaka, a child, Mrityo, of death, Kritva, placing, Eva, certainly, Murdni, on the head, Angrim, feet, Aruroha, ascended, Hare, of the personality of Godhead, Padam, to the abode. Translation and purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapad, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. Please repeat. By hearing these topics from the sage Narada, the son of King Uttanapad, Dhruva, was enlightened regarding the personality of Godhead, and he ascended to the abode of the Lord, placing his feet over the head of death. Purport. While quitting his body, Maharaj Dhruva, the son of King Uttanapad, was attended by personalities like Sunanda and others, who received him in the kingdom of God. He left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own. Because he was due to quit this world, death was waiting for him. He did not care for death, however, and even with his present body, he boarded a spiritual airplane and went directly to the planet of Vishnu because of his association with the great sage Narada, who had spoken to him the narration of the pastimes of the Lord. So for those of you who are not familiar with the story of Dhruva Maharaj, I'm going to take an opportunity here to recount the entire story. It's a very profound story, and I think it's relevant for our lives today. So this Dhruva Maharaj, he was born the son of a great king named Uttanapad, and the king had 2 wives, and he begat children in both of them. And one day, while he was sitting on the throne, in a throne room, Dhruva's stepbrother got on the lap of his father, the king. And so naturally, Dhruva wanted also to get up on his father's lap, as young boys do. But we can picture this Uttanapad king kind of sitting on a throne, leisurely for a moment. And so in an affectionate mood, with one of the boys on his lap, he's offering his love and care. I suspect in a throne room, you've got lots of people sitting around too. I mean, at least when you watch a movie and there's a king, there's people sitting around, so it's not really a private place. But in this case, Uttanapad, he was offering affection to one of his sons. And so Dhruva, he thought, well, okay, I'll get in on that too. And he climbed up, or at least he tried to climb up on the lap of his father. But his father didn't offer him any affection or even attention. He was totally focused on his other son. And so this was very hurtful to Dhruva. And on top of the fact that his father wasn't giving him any affection, Dhruva's stepmother, she jumped up when he tried to get on his father's lap, and she chastised Dhruva for trying to get on his father's knees. She starts saying, and I don't know why in the Bhagavatam there's always this, my dear boy, my dear wife. I mean, that's anyway the preface for pretty much everything. So I don't know if it's poetic or if they're really talking like that, but maybe so. My dear boy, she said, speaking loudly so that everyone could hear. So apparently there's tons of people there. They're not just a private family. You cannot sit on the lap of your father. Although you are his son, you are disqualified because you have not taken birth in my womb. So Dhruva's stepmother happened to be the favorite wife of the king, and since the king was, and this is not my words, this is Prabhupada's words, was more or less henpecked by her, he allowed her to speak out, although she was verbally abusing the little boy. So she continues to try to humiliate the boy by exploiting her position as the king's favorite wife. So she continues. She said, if you want to sit on your father's lap, you must first worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead by penances and austerities. And then in your next life, you can take birth in my womb, and then you will be eligible to sit on the king's lap. So just an aside, this notion that a person has to take birth in a particular family in order to be qualified as a Brahmana or Vaishnava, this is kind of a bogus idea. Srila Prabhupada refuted this all the time. And when he brought Western devotees to India, that was a big kerfuffle. Hindus said, well, you can't, Western people have to take birth as Indians in a Hindu family in order to become Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada said that's totally not true. That it has a lot more to do with one's qualification as a devotee. It has nothing to do with one's physical birth. But you often would hear that, and this is an ancient thing here, thousands of years, this story is like thousands of years old, but that notion is still prevalent today in some of the Hindu community. So after receiving such verbal abuse from his stepmother, naturally, Dhruva, he burst into tears and he ran home to take shelter of his birth mother, blurting out the whole story just as a 5-year-old child would do. And it's interesting that Dhruva in this story is only 5 years old, so it's completely unimaginable, unconscionable that his parents would treat him that way. I mean, you just would think, what can a 5-year-old expect from the parents? At that age, the expectation is that you are unconditionally loved. But in this case, we see that both the parents were completely insensitive and inaccessible. So this story, as narrated in the Bhagavatam, it happened about 5,000 years ago. And we can see from this story that child abuse has been going on for a very, very long time. It's not something in the recent times. I always thought, well, it's Kali Yuga, this kind of thing happens, but thousands of years ago, when people were more in the Dwapara Yuga, perhaps. But this story tells, no, it's been going on for a long time. Somehow or other, when people identify themselves as holding positions of power, there's a strong tendency to misuse or abuse this power by intentionally causing harm to those they view as having less power. And because children and even animals, they have small bodies often, not always. You have elephants and giraffes and animals with big bodies, but they have perhaps less intelligent material intelligence, while they may have more attunement in a more emotionally sensitive way. But typically, when a person has a smaller body or less intelligent, they're more vulnerable to being abused by people who have more power, at least in the material world. And therefore, devotees of Krishna, it's our duty to protect them from such abuse. So seeing Dhruva so upset and crying, his birth mother says helplessly, as I guess any mother would do, "My dear boy, what can I do? Your father loves your stepmother as his favorite wife, and he doesn't consider me at all. What your stepmother, the queen, said to you is actually true. You must worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then it might be possible for you to sit on the throne." So Dhruva, descending from his father, who was a kshatriya, the word for warrior is kshatriya, he was also a warrior. He was of that heritage. And so kshatriyas, the literal translation of kshatriya is one who is impatient for change. And therefore, Dhruva, like most kshatriyas, are very fiery by nature, and they are very much under the influence of the mode of passion. And often they have a kind of a short temper. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, to be impatient for change. Sometimes you need people who say, we need to get moving. We're talking about this vision for a long time. When is it going to start being implemented, or when are we going to do it? And it takes a kshatriya with some impatience and perhaps even righteous anger to motivate people to change something that may be morally wrong. So Dhruva, he wanted to have his father's kingdom, which he believed he deserved as the son of the king. And so he asked his birth mother, "What do I need to do in order to get my father's kingdom, or a kingdom more powerful or more large than my father's kingdom?" And Dhruva was so passionate that he was ready to do just about anything to get what he wanted. But because he was a little boy, he really didn't have an idea how to get it. So he wanted to know what to do. So as most little boys do, they may ask their mom, I don't know what to do here. What should I do? I want to have a kingdom more powerful than my father's. How do I get that? So his mother wisely told him, "Well, you must worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead to get what you want." So Dhruva thought for a minute and considered that, and then he thought, well, both my mother and my stepmother are telling me that if I want to get what I want, I have to approach God, the Supreme Person, to fulfill all my desires. So I guess I should do that. But then he realized that he had no idea where God was or how to find him. So again, he asked his mom, so where is God exactly? Where or how can I find him? So his mother says to Dhruva that all she knew was that saintly persons typically went to the forest to find God. And she had no idea what they were doing there in the forest to find God. She just knew, well, somehow people, they go to the forest and they find God there, so maybe that's the solution. So Dhruva immediately, getting that information, he left his father's city and went to the forest. He had no idea what to do next once he got to the forest. So we might actually be thinking, well, yeah, really, a 5-year-old boy like Dhruva, could he really be safe in the forest? Would he actually have the courage to go there alone? But we'll see as the story starts to evolve what an extraordinary person that Dhruva was. Just like I've noticed that in modern times, we have some incredibly extraordinary children, and not just in the Hare Krishna movement, but we also see that there are children proteges who maybe at the age of 3, they can play, Bach and Beethoven piano. They just, from the time they're born, they are able to play. Or I've seen children who can speak like 6 or 8 languages, and they just rattle them off. They don't know quite how they know, or an incredible memory. And you're going to see extraordinary children, such extraordinary children, and you understand that they have already started mastering some of these skills in a previous lifetime, or even many lifetimes. So what you're seeing is a continuation of a previous life. So it's the same thing with spiritually evolved children, and I've seen even in our Hare Krishna movement some incredibly wise and articulate children who are 3 or 4 years old. So this is not unusual. It's not like a mythology that Dhruva was so intelligent and capable. It's also interesting to note that in our scripture text that Narada Muni also left home when his mother died to find God. He was 5 years old also. And Prahlad Maharaj was also 5 years old when he took shelter of the Lord's holy name, and he started to preach to his classmates that they should chant Hare Krishna as the quickest and most joyful means of developing one's love for God. So just a little bit of a background or caveat is in the ancient Indian system, young boys were typically sent to the home of their guru. That's the word for that, the home of the guru, is the Gurukul, at the age of 5. And I'm suspecting, just as a mother who sent both her boys to Gurukul at 5, I'm suspecting that the logic behind sending children to school or out of the home in a boarding school, not like we do more today where the children live at home, but sending children away from home to study, I'm suspecting that there was this notion that if a child is put in crisis, like Narada Muni, whose mother died, he had nowhere to go, so he started to wander, inquiring about the goal of life, and also Dhruva, who out of his anger and his hurt, he was in crisis, so he also started to go to the forest, that we had this notion, or somebody had this notion, that, okay, so how do we get to have children like Narada Muni or like Dhruva? Everybody wants their child to be enlightened, and that's why you have children. But now what's the formula? So my sense is that, well, you put them in crisis. This is what we did. Sometimes it worked, and many times it didn't work, that you take a child from his home and you put him in a foreign place, and of course they're in crisis, probably traumatized most of the time, and they have no way to take shelter of anything because their parents aren't there, their toys are not there, and so if you cultivate them correctly, they will take shelter of the Lord. I think it was on Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance day that Radha Dasi, who does the reception, and Radha, if you're listening, forgive me for mentioning it, but I was very impressed by your story of how when she was 4, she was sent to the Gurukul in Dallas, and she was obviously in shock. At that age, your parents are gone, you don't know anyone, and she, at that moment, was standing in front of the deities, and she took shelter of Krishna. It's like, I have nobody else in this world, so I'm praying to you, please take care of me. So that's a very evolved concept for a 4-year-old. So this is what we're looking at when we're thinking of Dhruva. Of course, we've had lots of Gurukul disasters that we're sorry about, and we're trying to make amends to those children who were traumatized. But I think the logic comes from seeing in history that you have these successful saintly people who took full shelter out of a traumatic event, and we thought, well, maybe we should create that. I'm not a fan or a promoter of artificially putting children in crisis, because I think life already has enough suffering. We don't need to add more crises. And I think our destiny at the point of birth is you get a certain amount of pleasure and pain, and so do children, and so they will get what they need in order to advance in spiritual life. I don't think we need to artificially create that crisis. So anyway, back to the story. When Dhruva got to the forest, he saw so many animals there, and he started to ask them. Interestingly, such a smart guy. Well, are you God? I see you there, to the animals. So he wandered around the forest like that, trying to find God by asking this one and that one, as he had no other information. Who's God? I don't know what he looks like. I don't know if I saw him, what that would be. So his mother had just said, all I know is that saintly people find God in the forest. So, but he didn't know more than that. So Dhruva began calling out, where is God? Where are you? And I personally remember, as some devotees have told me they have done before they found their spiritual master, crying out, just if God is out there, if there's somebody out there listening, please say something, do something. We may have grown up in an environment where we talked a lot about God, but maybe we had no idea what we were looking for. And Dhruva was like that too. And he didn't know anything about a spiritual discipline, so he inquired from trees and the animals where God could be found. And so he was very sincere. He really did want to find the absolute truth, or what we call God. And Narada Muni, who is the eternal spiritual master, who travels to all planets in his mission to deliver love of God, he's appeared before him suddenly. He just showed up. And that's the nature of Narada Muni. He's not at all limited by time and space. He's eternally present now, showing up in various planets and universes when people call for help. So, according to Indian wisdom, ancient text wisdom, when a person is sincerely searching for Krishna, Krishna sends that person a bona fide spiritual master to give him instructions how to reach him. So because the Supreme Lord is also in the hearts of not just all living beings, but also enlightened beings, Narada Muni was directed from within him by the Lord to go and instruct Narada. So he actually became Narada Muni's spiritual master. I don't know if it was any formal ceremony, but Dhruva Maharaj took shelter of him, and Narada Muni gave him instruction. So I remember before I became a devotee that I was desperately trying to find out what was truth and what was God, and I had read this book, Be Here Now, by Baba Ram Das. It was very popular back in the 60s. And it said exactly the same thing that is stated here in the Vedas, that when a person is desperately eager to find the truth, God from within their heart guides them to an authentic teacher who will give them instructions how to awaken their forgotten love for God. And God also, he inspires this bona fide teacher within their heart to instruct the sincere devotee. So the two things are required in order to have enlightenment, is you need a bona fide teacher, but you also need a bona fide student who is eager to learn. And then the magic starts to happen through inquiry and reception, oral reception. So Narada was actually pretty surprised when he saw how courageous Dhruva was in his urgency to see God. And so he approached him in the forest and said, "My dear child," here's that "my dear child" thing. Dhruva, it always seems very funny to me that people say that in the scripture. And I wonder if people really spoke like that. And so he's saying, I understand your situation, but you shouldn't take your father's words so seriously. Don't be so insulted. Don't take it so seriously. You've come to the forest to find God, but this requires a lot of difficult, austere yoga practices, and that's very impossible for you as a 5-year-old. So my advice to you is that you should go home, and when you grow up, you can take to this path or try to follow this difficult process. But now's not the time. Don't stay here in this forest. But Dhruva could not accept Narada's advice. Remember, he was a kshatriya, he was a warrior, and so he had a mind of his own. And he said back to him, well, I understand your instructions are very valuable and they're very good, but they're not for me. I'm very upset by what has happened, and I'm not very spiritually inclined. He was quite honest about himself. I'm not really inclined to take up this spiritual path. I just want to fulfill my material desires, to have a kingdom greater than my father. So if you can just help me get what I want, don't tell me to go home. You should go home yourself if you're telling me to go home. He was really being quite sassy there for somebody in regarding their spiritual master. So he felt that the sage was going to instruct him. He said, don't tell me anything unless you're going to tell me how to fulfill my desires. I don't want to hear anything else. And so he that's kind of impudently pushed back on that. And in the same way, some people approach bhakti yoga out of curiosity, but when they hear Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita, just give up everything and surrender unto me, they feel that this is an impossible request, because their notion of surrender is that it means they no longer can fulfill any of their personal desires. However, this essential instruction of this story, this is why this story is so incredible, is that despite having material desires, it shows that people can approach God to fulfill them. In fact, it's desirable. If you have material desires, the best person to approach is the Supreme Person. It's considered a pious activity to go to God to get your material desires fulfilled. Although that's not the ultimate realization, it's certainly better than trying to fulfill them yourself. And you'll have a lot more luck if you go to God. So a person should never become discouraged from pursuing the path of bhakti just because they have some material desires. And I think we all have, in the back of our mind, some corner of our heart, we all have some things that we want to do in this world. Maybe we have certain preferences, tastes for life, styles of life, and it's kind of mixed. We're dovetailing those propensities in Krishna's service, and little by little we get satisfied and give up those attachments until we are hopefully able to come to the point of direct relationship or face-to-face relationship with Krishna. So this is also considered yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, and bhakti yoga is obviously the ultimate goal. And we practice bhakti along the way, but there's also some mix and tinges in fruitive activities. And so we should not be discouraged from, okay, well then if I can't do all or nothing, well just try, do what you can. That's what we should be doing. And don't give up, and eventually our hearts get purified and we do develop love for Krishna. It's just a matter of time. So because Narada Muni, he was a pure, true spiritual master, he naturally was very kind and eager to see that everyone goes back to Godhead. So he agreed to instruct Dhruva how he could find God, even though he had the material desires that he wanted to obtain this kingdom that was greater than his father, who was he was pretty angry at by this time. And in fact, Dhruva wasn't just angry, he was spiteful. He wanted revenge. That was his reason for wanting to have a larger kingdom. It wasn't not just envy, but also anger and wanting to get revenge. So he says, I don't just want a kingdom larger than my father's. I want to have a kingdom greater than even Lord Brahma's, the controller of the universe. So that's enormous. And from Narada's transcendental perspective, he was thinking, the little boy Dhruva, he shouldn't take his family's insults very seriously. But Narada reasons, still, let him approach the Supreme Lord, regardless of the reason that he wants to do it. Let me nurture in him a desire at least to approach the Supreme Lord. So Narada, he then tells Dhruva that he should absorb himself in devotional service to the all-powerful Supreme Personality of Godhead by performing the eightfold yoga system, which begins with the practice of sitting postures and breath control for the purpose of subduing the mind. It is described in the Bhagavad Gita that the mind is uncontrollable as the wind. So instead of saying that we have to control the mind, because it's stated elsewhere that it's not really possible to control the mind, I prefer to say we need to at least manage the mind in order to make progress. You may not be able to get it to sit still, but by using it in the service of Krishna, there's a way to manage the mind. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that the goal of yoga process is to find Krishna, but that this process cannot be executed in this day and age because it's not possible to follow all the rules and regulations of the yoga process. Instead, the Vedic texts recommend that we chant the holy names of God because people today have a very short duration of life, and they have very little genuine interest in spiritual life. And even if they are interested, most people are unable to practice a rigid spiritual practice or discipline because their minds are constantly being disturbed by the distractions of the present so-called civilization. So because of this, Krishna's greatest disciple, Arjuna, he rejected this eightfold yoga path as too difficult. And this is discussed at length in the chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. So Narada Muni, he instructs Dhruva to fix his mind on the form of the Lord, which he described by saying, this was Narada's description, the Lord's face is perpetually very beautiful and pleasing in attitude. To the devotee who sees him, he appears to be never displeased. Every limb of the Lord is always youthful. Both his eyes and lips are pinkish like the rising sun. He is always prepared to give shelter to the surrendered soul. And one who is so fortunate as to look upon him feels all satisfaction. He is the ocean of mercy, wearing a garland of flowers. He is eternally manifest with 4 hands which hold the conch, disc, conch shell, wheel, club, and lotus flower. In addition to meditating on the eternal blissful form of the Lord, Narada also instructed Dhruva to chant the sacred mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which means I bow or I offer prostrations to Vasudeva, which is another name for Krishna, and to pray to the Lord and worship the deity form of the Lord. So that was his instruction in order to get his desires fulfilled. So it's interesting to note that the word yoga means literally to connect particularly with the Supreme or the source of life. It's the same word as the word religion, which in Latin the word ligio means to link or to connect. And as a prefix means once again. So the word religion literally means to link again or connect with the Supreme Being, the source of life. So yoga and religion are basically a path to reconnecting with the Supreme Being or source of life. So like Dhruva, the goal of each of our lives is to find a bona fide spiritual teacher who can guide us in realizing our true selves by engaging in devotional service to God even while we perform our daily activities. So back to the story. So Dhruva, he followed Narada Muni's instructions, and he engaged in severe penances in order to realize God. And during the first month of his yoga practice, he ate only fruit and berries every 3rd day, and only to keep his body and soul together. And in this way, he worshipped the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the 2nd month, Dhruva Maharaj ate only once every 6 days, and he ate only dry grass and leaves while continuing his worship. In the 3rd month, he simply drank water once every 9 days, and he remained completely in trance, worshiping the Supreme Lord of God, Personality of Godhead, who is adored by select verses. He had no thought other than God. So if we think about it, we can see that our austerities are pretty insignificant compared to Dhruva's. We cannot really imitate him, thinking if we do like him, we're going to get the same result. Probably we will have a greater fall if we try to imitate. And it's not recommended that we imitate even the pure devotee. We have to follow and start where we are and make progress from there, not jump over, as Prabhupada said, like a monkey. But by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, in this present age, we have been given all kinds of concessions possible. And so Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, he started this ISKCON organization, and he's in this lineage coming down from Narada Muni, who's this very spiritual master of Dhruva. So, coming through the lineage, what is here now as the Hare Krishna movement is a manifestation of the same instructions that Narada Muni was giving to Dhruva, to fix one's mind on the form of the Lord and the holy name, who is non-different from the Lord, who's incarnating in this age as transcendental sound. So there's a real urgent need for all of us to study these ancient wisdom texts and hear from a bona fide spiritual master to understand Krishna in truth. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a great spiritual master in our lineage, he used to write, or he has writings where he's like, or songs, wake up, human beings. How long will you remain asleep in this lap of illusion? You've been given the rare opportunity of the human form of life. Now use it to realize God. So back to the story. So in the 4th month of his yoga practice, Dhruva mastered the breathing exercise, and he would inhale air only every 12th day. So in the 5th month, still controlling his breathing, he concentrated his mind fully on the Supreme Person and stood on one leg like a motionless column. In the next month, Dhruva Maharaj became completely absorbed in trance upon Lord Vishnu, Krishna. He suspended his breathing, closed all the holes of his body, and identified so closely with Lord Vishnu in consciousness that when he stopped breathing, the total universal breathing became choked up, and all the demigods of the universe felt like they were suffocating. So if you imagine 100 people sitting on an airplane, even though each person is an individual, each individual shares the total force of the airplane, which runs at a speed of hundreds of miles an hour. So when the unit energy is identified with the total energy in service, the unit energy becomes as powerful as the total energy. So in the same way, Dhruva suspended his breathing, and the breathing of the entire universe was suspended. And so the Lord, when the demigods came and said, we're suffocating, something's happening, the universe seems to be tilting, the Lord assured them, don't worry. These calamities are due to the severe austerities and full determination of the son of King Uttanapad, who is fully absorbed in thoughts of me, and who has obstructed the universal breathing process. You can return to your respective homes safely. I shall stop this boy from his severe acts of austerity. So Narada comes, and he, in the middle of his meditation, Dhruva, he was totally absorbed in meditating on the Lord within his heart. And he has this vision of Lord Vishnu, and suddenly it's gone. In the middle of his deep, deep meditation, the image of Lord Vishnu, he goes away like a lightning rod. And so he was a little frustrated. What happened? His eyes are closed. He's like trying to find or get back to that center point. So he opens his eyes, and in front of him is actually Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vishnu is there, right there in front of him. And when the vision of his heart disappeared, he thought he had lost God, but when he opened his eyes, he saw God was standing in front of him in his Vishnu form. So Dhruva, not knowing what else to do, he was compelled to fall flat on his face before the Lord. And he wanted to offer prayers, but he was so overwhelmed he couldn't even speak. So the Lord, he touched him with his conch shell, and he could understand that Dhruva had a lot of emotions, but he couldn't express them. So when he was touched by the Lord's conch shell, he finally could offer prayers, and he expressed his transcendental sentiments, which are cherished by all devotees even today. And so Dhruva started to pray, my dear Lord, you are all powerful, and by entering within me, you have enlivened all my sleeping senses, and foolish persons such as me worship you to satisfy their body, which is merely a bag of skin. Although you are a desire tree and cause liberation from birth and death, I'm praying for things which are available even in a hellish condition. So he prayed in a repentant spirit, and he was sorry that he had sought the Lord for some insignificant things. So after seeing the Lord face to face, Dhruva prayed, "Please bless me with the association of great devotees who engage in your transcendental loving service. I'm becoming mad to hear about your transcendental qualities and pastimes which are eternally existent." So after that, I'm going to skip forward because of time. Dhruva's father, meanwhile, back at the ranch, he had heard a little bit about what was going on with Narada. He learned that he'd gone to the forest. He had thought by that time Narada had died or been eaten by foxes, as you would imagine, 5-year-old children roaming around in the forest with wild animals. He was doubting, is this true? People were saying, no, he's alive. He's actually a changed person in the forest. So the father was feeling very regretful that he had been so offensive and that he felt the need to go to the forest. And so when he heard that wonderful news that Narada Muni was actually alive, he prepared this huge procession of chariots that were bedecked with gold filigree to meet his son. So you can imagine a whole procession coming from the palace with all these dignitaries coming to meet him. And when Dhruva's father saw him, even though he was surrounded by all the citizens of his kingdom and family members, he threw off his pretense and his dignity as a king, and he just ran to embrace him. And he saw him for himself, that Dhruva was completely a changed person. He could see that Dhruva's personal effulgence, that his consciousness had become completely transformed. And he offered, not only that, it was just such a beautiful story. Not only that, after offering his obeisances to his father, Dhruva next threw himself at the feet of his abusive stepmother. Now that's enormous. I'm not sure I could do that. You know, the one who had verbally abused him. And she, in response, she raised him in her arms and she said, "Long may you live." So right after this, Dhruva's father, King Uttanapad, enthroned him as the emperor of the planet and then left the forest for his own spiritual realization. And then Dhruva, he ruled the earth as a king for 36,000 years, and he displayed all godly qualities. And as promised, the Lord, he satisfied all his senses. And after 36,000 years, Dhruva handed over the charge of the earth to his son and left the kingdom and his wife, children. And as he meditated on Krishna's form in a trance of devotional service, symptoms of ecstasy began to manifest in his body, and tears flowed from his eyes. His heart melted, and there was shivering all over his body. And in that devotional trance, he completely forgot his bodily existence and became liberated from the material bondage. So as soon as these symptoms of liberation were manifest, Dhruva Maharaj saw a beautiful airplane coming down from the sky, as if the brilliant full moon were coming down, illuminating all directions. And Dhruva saw in the airplane 2 associates of Lord Vishnu who possessed the same bodily features as Vishnu, with 4 hands and a blackish bodily luster. The 2 associates of Vishnu told Dhruva, "This unique airplane has been sent by the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of your unalloyed devotional service. You are quite ready to board the plane." And after hearing the words of the associates of Lord Dhruva, the Lord Dhruva offered his respectful obeisances to the sages in the forest, and he prepared to board the plane. But in the meantime, his body became completely spiritualized and was now as brilliant as molten gold. And so as Dhruva started to prepare to board this airplane, he saw death personified approaching him. But he was fearless of death at that point, and the death personified bowed down to him, and he stepped on top of death itself and walked into this airplane in his body form. He didn't have to give up his body to enter. It had become so spiritualized. And while he's sitting on this plane, getting ready to leave, Dhruva is thinking to himself, how can I go alone to the spiritual world and leave behind my poor mother? How the Vishnu Dutas who were on that plane, they understood his mind and they assured him that his mother would also simultaneously go to Vaikuntha in a different airplane. So it's understood that the greatest asset is in a family is to have a child who is a devotee and can liberate even his family members. So Dhruva was passing through space. He saw all the planets of the solar system, and he also saw the demigods in their airplanes showering flowers on him like rain. And Dhruva passed all the planetary systems and ultimately attained the pole star. We call it the Dhruva star. I think it's that star that we can see at night, this bright star. I think we call it the North Star or the polar star, but that's eternally that's eternally a place where Dhruva resides. So it's just a wonderful story of how, if we continue to practice spiritual life, even with material desires, sincerely seeking the Lord, eventually there's this hope that we can develop a love of God and actually go back home, back to Godhead. So I'll stop here. I know it's a long story, but it's a really beautiful story. And if you have any reflections or questions or comments, yes.
Thoughts on it? Thank you. It says that he left, he's talking about Dhruva, he left this world at an early age as a young boy, although he had attained the throne of his father and had several children of his own.
I think you have to read that. I know, I saw that. I said, how is that possible? You kind of have to read it with commas, you know, that he left home as a young boy, comma, and then he then, you know, I mean, I think it just smashed in the whole thing. You know, obviously, he was 5 years old. He was not now married and having a bunch of kids.
Oh, yeah.
I just think that it's one of those, you know, Bhagavatam abbreviated thing. In one breath, you're saying a lot of stuff. Yeah. But I also had a double take when I read that. I said, no, what does that mean? I just think it needs a comma in there.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yeah. Any reflections or insights that you got from this story? Yeah.
Mine's just more about the comment you made about how they greet each other. What was it? My dear boy.
My dear child.
Yeah, my dear child. I remember when I first read the CC, the Pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, they used the word sir a lot. That really surprised me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a translated thing, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, it's a way of showing respect, you know, which probably we would not do in a Western context. So, but yeah. It's kind of Old English. Prabhupada was an Old English writer, and I think he had an English dictionary. Probably. Yes.
When you were talking about Narad trying to encourage Dhruva to take the ultimate path, and Dhruva saying, no, I'm full of desires. So I was thinking, Prabhupada sort of dealt with us in the same way, didn't he? That he came up with that term dovetailing.
Yeah.
Whatever desires you have, there's a way you can use them for Krishna.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, Prabhupada was very canny.
Yes. Oh God, yes. I mean, now that I'm an old lady and looking back at what 20-year-old people are doing today and what we looked like to Prabhupada, he was just as proud of us. He never let on that we were completely nuts. You know, he never, you know, even when he would take us to India, oh, these are my, of course, dancing white elephants, but he was very proud and saw the sincerity there. Even we were so clunky and awkward, you know. He just saw the goodness. And I think that's what a Paramahamsa does, is they see the service. You know, you may do it awkward, you may not be able to pronounce the Sanskrit or whatever, but you're doing it, and just keep doing it. It gets better with time. Yeah. Okay, breakfast time. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.